Hey, here's a question you've probably asked. I know I've asked it and I've been asked it lots of times. How could a good and loving God allow evil and suffering in the world? Isn't that a great question? Like, it doesn't make sense, does it, that a loving God could allow evil, or does it? You see, the kind of world that God created included free will. God wanted to create a world where you and I get to freely choose. In fact, if you think about it, that's the best kind of world, because things like love wouldn't be possible without our ability to freely choose. If we were pre-programmed, if we were robots, if we were already determined, then things like love wouldn't really be able to exist. But the kind of world God wanted to create included this idea of free will. Jordan Peterson says this: it's better to have a world where evil is possible and yet not chosen than a world where we're unable to choose at all. I think that's a great insight. You see, in making that kind of world, God took a risk. He took a risk that we would use our free will to cause harm, to choose our free will to be selfish. And indeed, on the Christian worldview, that's what we believe has happened. We believe that humanity has used its free will, used its choice to reject God and to bring into the world all manner of consequences and suffering and evil. There are largely three kinds of pain or suffering that we'll experience in this broken world. The first one we might call natural disasters. They're earthquakes and volcanoes. It can relate to our bodies in terms of illness and suffering, or maybe just having an accident that causes us pain and suffering. Oftentimes these things feel very unfair. You know, on a Christian worldview, the source of those kinds of pain and suffering go right back to the beginning, when we rejected the Creator from our creation. We told God we didn't want Him involved in this world any longer, and we'd do it our own way. And as a result of the Creator being rejected from creation, suffering came into the creation, and that's what we experience in those things today. It was a result of our free will. The second kind of suffering we talk about is what we call malevolence, which is the suffering we might cause to one another, either by doing things we shouldn't do to others or by not doing things that would help others. We might talk about wars. We might talk about, for example, did you know there's enough food in the world to feed everybody? But we don't. These acts of malevolence are our choice, again, our free will as human beings. The third area that we might talk about in terms of pain is consequence. You know, we've probably all done things and said things that have had difficult or painful or hard consequences as a result. And they are a result of our choices too. You see, God didn't choose the suffering. We did. But you know, the great news is that in spite of all of our choices that we've made, God cares for us. He still loves us. The Creator we rejected still loves us. There's a great verse in the book of John chapter 11. It's the shortest verse in the Bible. It simply says, Jesus wept. You know, that short verse tells us a lot about God. It tells us that He cares. It tells us that He's compassionate and that He mourns with us in our suffering. It tells us that He hasn't left us alone in a world of bad choices, but that He's entered in and He cares, and He wants to give you and I hope that there is more. He's a good judge. I heard a great story about a judge once that helps me understand the kind of judge that Jesus is. The story goes this, that a young man was brought into a courtroom. He was guilty of a number of crimes, and he stood in the dock, and the judge instantly recognized him as the child that many years ago lived next door to him, who he'd even babysat at times. And now he was grown up, and the judge recognized this young man in the dock. And the judge heard the list of crimes that he'd committed, and he had to make a judgment that this young man would have to pay a great fine. But the judge cared for this young man. And so he took off his robe, and after pronouncing the judgment, stepped out of the judge's chair, came down into the dock with the young man, and took out his checkbook, and then wrote the fine into the check and paid it for this young man. What a tremendous example of care. That even though this young man had made bad decisions, the judge still loved him and paid the penalty for him. You know, that's a picture of Jesus Christ, who stepped into our broken world, broken by our own free will and our own choices, stepped into a world of suffering in love and in compassion, and gave his own life as the penalty for the wrong things that you and I had done, the bad decisions we had made. He wanted to demonstrate to you and I that he still cares for us. He freely chose of his free will to enter into our brokenness and redeem us, rescue us, bring us back from the bad decisions that we've made that have brought this evil into the world. So I want to encourage you today to think about God as that kind of judge. He's right to say we've done some bad things, we've made some bad choices, but it doesn't stop there. He cares about you. He cares about this world. He cares about the suffering, and he offers us hope that there is a way out.